Donahue and myself thought it would be valuable to have Dr. Goad be a part of our Zoom meeting. So Brian Donahue contacted Dr. Goad and they discussed what the agenda could be to be extremely helpful for the Zoom meeting as we prepare to go back to school. So Brian Donahue, thank you for contacting Dr. Goad, and thank you for being our hostess with the mostest. Thanks very much. How we'll manage today's meeting is Tyler has 3 topics, as you all know. Let Tyler get through a topic, and then we can open up for questions. If we can do that, Tyler, that would be great. And then we'll move on to the next topic, etc. It's my pleasure. Let me do a quick introduction. Dr. Goad, if you would, please. Dr. Goad is an assistant professor in the Department of Health, Physical Education, and Recreation at Emporia State University. Dr. Goad earned both his undergraduate degrees and master's in health and physical education from Emporia State University. Additionally, he served as a graduate teaching assistant in the Health, Physical Education, and Recreation Department from 2012 to 2014. He received his doctorate in kinesiology from West Virginia University in Morgantown, West Virginia, with an emphasis in physical education, teacher education. Dr. Goad is a member of Society of Health, Physical Education, Physical Educators, SHAPE, and the Kansas Association for Health, Physical Education, Recreation, and Dance, or CAFER. He received the American Kinesiology Association Graduate Student Writing Award at West Virginia University in 2018. His research interests include technology and physical education, student success and retention, professional issues in teacher education and higher education. And Dr. Goad, if you would, if you can start on our first topic, that would be fantastic. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for that introduction. And just kind of a little bit about my background too is the very first teaching gig I had was teaching online PE nearly a decade ago, which is kind of crazy to think. But then after that, that really led me into getting into research into West Virginia, and that's the majority of my writing and research is all related to online physical education. But like Ron said before, like I'm gonna have a little Q&A in between each of these. So we'll talk about a topic. I'll pop this picture slide in, and then I'll get out a screen share, and then we can chat a little bit about this. And just to kind of kick us off, though, I want to kind of show you a short clip from probably the most watched TED Talk about physical education on YouTube. And what I feel here is it really does highlight our attitude towards teaching online PE before COVID, and I know especially kind of probably my attitude I had about it too before I had to go teach online PE. So this is a real short one just to kind of get us started.
Across the country, they're dropping physical education. Here in Bend, for example, an elementary student may have physical education 1 day a week. A high school student only needs 1 credit of physical education to graduate. Heck, in Florida, you need 1 semester of physical education to graduate high school. And get this, they can do it online.
So I'm not sure that joke would probably land nearly as hard today, and that's kind of why Brian and Ryan have asked me to kind of talk today about these 3 topics and have some Q&A in between. People kind of viewed online PE as a joke, and in many cases, if you looked at what was going on in online PE, not much was happening relevant to these 3 topics that we're about to talk about. The first one being kind of like synchronous, asynchronous, and I was really happy to see that Ron and Brian asked me to talk about these 2 strategies to connect students with their peers and engaging students in physical activity, because in the research, when we look at student perspectives and instructor perspectives of those who participate in online health and physical education, those are the 2 glaring themes that come out. They want to connect to their peers and they want to connect to their instructors socially, and they feel like they're kind of on an island. So there's a gap in that socialization there. And then also instructors look at this, well, how do we validate the PE, the physical activity happening, and students going into online PE think that there won't be as much rigor when it comes to that. So those are very 2 valid topics to talk about. So we'll start out with synchronous versus asynchronous delivery and some things that we might want to consider. But I always like to kind of first put up, you know, like, well, there's just some good teaching practices that we already do in our face-to-face, and we kind of have to think about how are we going to transition these. And I'll highlight two, and two of these that really translate well into online physical education or just online pedagogy in general would be emphasizing the role as the student as an active participant in their own learning, being very student-centric in nature when you think about what we're going to put online and how they're going to interact with it. That's really how you're thinking about it, getting that engagement piece in there, making it relevant to them. And then also kind of focusing on higher level thinking, skill building, and not just the assimilation of facts and regurgitation. So how are they going to make it relevant to themselves so you can kind of increase that engagement? And it's just not like, you know, read a chapter, take a test. Turns into Jeopardy pretty quick. But good teaching is just good teaching regardless of technology. But we just can't let that technology get in the way of translating those awesome things that we do face-to-face. Now, with all that being said, there are some significant differences between the two, mainly in respect to the logistics of setting up the learning experience in an online environment. But we do have a little bit of guidance here, and I'm going to give you some kind of factors to consider when we're thinking synchronous versus asynchronous. And these are kind of the categories I'm going to briefly go over before we kind of open it up to the floor and hear from the room. Because usually the smartest person in the room, it's the room. And so I'd like to hear your input as well as kind of what you're looking at into opening up. But first thing to talk about is, okay, so what is it? So just in a nutshell, synchronous is specific time and place. It's what we're doing here right now. So during a Zoom meeting, 8 o'clock, you got to be there or you get left in the waiting room. Asynchronous, you're thinking anytime, anywhere. You're thinking module-based, where a student can pick it up at 9 a.m., where a student can log on, watch videos, go through the content at 5 p.m. or right before the due date sometimes. But this is asynchronous is very popular because it gives the students the flexibility to complete their coursework in this way. And that's generally when students choose to take online education, that's their expectation of why they sign up for it. So I'm sure if any of you have taken, I'm sure you've all taken master courses before and you've taken them online, you take them because you want that flexibility, and the students really do enjoy that flexibility of it. Another benefit to us in COVID is the disruption of schedules. So I know I had teachers contact me saying, I'm just gonna hold my class the same time I had it during the school year. I had class from 9:20 to 9:50, so I'll just have my class right in that block. Well, that's not necessarily gonna work with a household with one computer and everyone fighting over when they're gonna get to use it. So asynchronous is something that you're gonna have to think about. And if you're thinking about this in a hybrid format, that's the content you'll put online and then see them face-to-face in the synchronous. So that's what we think when we think hybrid. You're using a mixture of both of these. So what's the benefit? Well, the benefit to the synchronous is really the immediate feedback and interaction that we're all used to as health and physical educators. I mean, that's kind of why we got in it, to be interactive with the students. Another thing that's super beneficial to it is that in-the-moment feedback that we rely pretty heavily on in physical education, especially when it goes to giving feedback on motor skills. That in-the-moment feedback is crucial and is something that is still kind of a hole, well, it is a hole in online physical education, because if they're repping that skill out without you seeing it, one, there could be a safety issue. Two, they're doing it improperly, and you know drillers are killers. If they form a bad habit, it's really kind of tough to break that thing. So synchronous, that immediate feedback interaction. Self-pacing though for asynchronous and the student choice. I might keep referring to this being student-centric, allowing them to have choice over what content they dive deeper into, and then or how they complete assignments so they make it relevant to themselves, so they want to share and they want to complete the assignment in a meaningful way. Now there are some drawbacks, of course, to the synchronous versus asynchronous. Now the drawback is it's completely inflexible. So we kind of talked a little bit about the accessibility aspect of having synchronous time for the class. If you are all at a distance, you could have internet issues where people don't always have the same connection. I know it's 2020, but there are still in rural areas. I know I'm from a rural area in Kansas, and it's not always the best internet connection that you can get. So you kind of have to consider that, like, is this feasible for my context where I'm teaching at? In a metro area, you're probably not going to have as much problem with like connection speed, but you may have accessibility issues with devices. And we'll talk a little bit about that and some possible things that you can do with that related to how we used to do it with virtual school days when schools knew they were going to be in a blizzard for 3 days. Drawbacks to like asynchronous. It's that isolation where students kind of feel like they're on an island if we don't intentionally make an effort to facilitate social interactions in between them. Now, some examples. our video conference like we're on now, and some of you that I know have put on. Or another example is I know some schools are going to where the physical education teacher, especially in the elementary level, I know our local elementary schools are doing this, which I'm kind of happy they are. It was one of the suggestions I had is they're going to have them elementary school teachers in the gymnasium. They zoom in at one time to all the classes where the students aren't moving, and they lead physical education classroom based, but they're in the gymnasium and they just broadcast out to the whole school. That would be a synchronous way to do it, especially at the elementary level. Asynchronous, you're kind of thinking that discussion board. People pop in, pop out, kind of like a forum. Now, when you're considering, okay, synchronous versus asynchronous, well, what's your student readiness? All right, and the most important thing, well, it's the student when you're doing these choices. But things to consider with the students that you're saying is, okay, so what's their readiness to independent self-directed learning? Well, if you're looking at the elementary level, it's probably not going to be too high. It's probably going to be, you know, the parent who drives that ship. So that's what I'd be looking at there. And so you're thinking kind of, if you can, if possible, be more synchronous in nature, that's what's going to be, because the caregiver is going to be the one disseminating that knowledge to them. Whereas at the more independent level is like when you start hitting that middle school level, they can have that more self-directed learning and pace. But those are things that you kind of have to condition into them. And it really starts with you setting up your rules, routines, and procedures at the secondary level, especially for online PE, just like you would in a face-to-face course. It's just a little bit different with the online one. Just like, you know, hey, here's the procedure, how we're checking out lockers, we're taking attendance, we're dressing out for the day. Well, now in online, it's like, okay, hey, here's a video of me screencasting, walking you through my course and some similar items we're going to be using throughout the term. Like, here's the link to submit your physical activity for the week. Here's the link for the introduction videos and how my modules will be constructed. Those are things that you're thinking, like, can I set them up for success there? Technology, how technology out there. Now, there's the myth of the digital native. And that is, it's really easy to mistake like their immersion in technology for digital literacy. Now, a teacher I interviewed for a study on how to train online physical educators, she described this very superficial relationship she found that she was encountering with students that she taught in online PE with technology. And I read this quote because it really stuck with me, and I'll read it verbatim to you. And she said from this paper that I published was, everybody's good at taking selfies and videos, but the video editing, putting in text to enhance the video, they just don't do that very well. So how do they use the technology in educational context? Don't confuse that with just because they have a cell phone, they can use Facebook. Doesn't mean, okay, now they could use that social media in the educational context to relate it to your content. You have to be very intentional with that. And also, okay, so what's the motivation level? As we probably all saw last year, it was just kind of in survival mode. So now that they know there is going to be some accountability factors, I think that's going to really shore some things up in that. And so with that being said, I'm going to kind of pop out of my screen share here and kind of open it up. So I'm not sure how we want to kind of moderate it.
Well, if you have questions in the chat, I can moderate the chat. I think that's probably the best way to do that. We've got about 100 people on the Zoom, so I'm not sure. Wow. So you want to throw questions in the chat, I'll moderate that and read them out to Tyler, if that's okay.
Was there the hand raise feature? Yeah.
Someone wants to just speak up too until Brian catches up with the chat. Go ahead, please. Tyler, let me ask you a question. With your online, is it predominantly asynchronous?
Yeah, for sure, it's asynchronous. And I should make a clarification. Like, you know, if you're thinking about you had time to plan, you're ready, and all these students chose to be online physical education, you know, it's going to be asynchronous because they sign up for the flexibility generally. Most people think, you know, like the people going into online physical education pre-COVID, you know, might have been the student who didn't want to be physically active or was trouble in class and had to get moved there. But a lot of the time, it was the student who was taking like a college credit course and needed to free up an hour in his block was going into it. So it was very asynchronous in nature, where this is going to be, I don't call this like quality online PE. Some of this that we had in the last spring, I call emergency remote teaching.
Exactly what it was. A couple questions for you here, Tyler. Is there a platform that has been more successful than others in your experience?
Now, when you're saying platforms, if we're talking about learning management systems, the predominant one right now in the public school system is Google Classroom. It's free. And what I'm going to tell you this, and I have it later on, but just make sure that you're rowing the boat in the same direction. So always making sure that if your district uses Canvas, you're using Canvas as your hub. Like that's like going through the front doors of class. Like everyone goes through the front door into the school. And then if you want to use different software, branch out from the hub. But everyone needs to go through the front door first. Don't just use Seesaw over here and then don't abandon Google Classroom if the whole district uses Google Classroom. Because what happens is a family's going to have someone in kindergarten, someone in 8th grade, and maybe a senior. And if a parent has to manage these 3 or 4 different platforms, I've heard feedback it's just too overwhelming.
So Tyler, you talked a little bit about student readiness. Is it really realistic for 5 and 6-year-olds to participate in Synchronous?
In my opinion, not unless they're in the school, like I kind of described with the broadcast method. That was something I suggested to our school district. I was like, it's probably not going to be these individual block times because the parents are probably at work, and if not, they're going to be, with grandma, grandpa, or some caregiver. But if they're in the school, it makes sense to he broadcasts that synchronously. The teacher's there to kind of facilitate that, leading the, classroom physical activity based stuff. I don't think it's as realistic that you're going to get synchronous without a solid facilitator at that level. There's no way around it. And I have this later on, but when we wrote the 2018 SHAPE guidelines for online physical education, one of the things that we put in there as an inappropriate practice was teaching elementary online physical education because of these reasons that we could never get around. The problem is that stopped the conversation from developing content for it. So what we're kind of left with is homeschool online physical education, which caters to elementary. But then again, if you look at that curriculum, it really turns into physical education, teacher education, because you're teaching the parent how to teach their student at home. That's essentially what it becomes.
Question from New York City. How do you handle a teacher who might be hesitant about going live in a synchronous way due to security or those types of things?
I would hope by now that the school district has a secure platform like Zoom. I know you've heard, Zoom bombings and stuff, but, having your passwords on your meetings would be a big help to it. And using the admit feature that you just used to let everyone in, right? If you don't recognize the name or it's not on a roster, don't let them in.
John asks, what AV solutions are best for hybrid models?
AV solutions, so audio visual. Oh, there's a lot of different ones out there. So if you're talking about just like what video software for screencasting, I would just check with your IT and your district about what software they've already purchased. And like I said before, rowing the boat in the same direction. If they have, everyone's using Zoom to record their content and put it on there, use that. Screencastify is one that's free that I like using for Google Classroom because it automatically uploads to your Google Classroom. It has a feature that just syncs in there. It's a Google Chrome extension. So it was made for Google Classroom. It's very intuitive. It just syncs with your classroom automatically. Some people are using Loom because Loom just came out, similar to Screencastify, a Google Chrome extension, but now they're completely free for this next 6-month period. So a lot of people have been jumping on Loom now. There's a lot of different ones out there. I would check what your school is using and use that platform. That's the best platform, is the one your district's using. That way no one gets confused.
Good thought.
We've got a couple of statements, but I'm going to let people read the statements on their own and go right to the questions. Can you talk more about giving students choice at home and developing lessons with higher level thought?
Yeah, and I'm going to give some examples of those in the next 2 categories. I think that's really going to shed some light on what does that student choice look like.
One of the biggest hurdles at this time is accountability for distance learning, especially with students who have technology access difficulties.
Yeah, yes. that's the best thing I can say, yes. I think people did a good job of, you saw those stories where they got out and they got the Wi-Fi, hotspots for them. But if there's a student out there and they just straight up, don't have the laptop, the school district can't supply them, we're at an impasse and we're going back to the correspondence course method, which is like the old Pony Express where, you're sending them the packet home to complete the workout. And then you're back to the activity logs that we used to do in online physical education, right? Where the parent is signing off on it and they're supposed to complete it, whatever that physical activity component is, and then you get it back. It's honestly, it's how we overcome it when we were doing in West Virginia one time, they started offering virtual school days. And the virtual school days were there because in 2016, when I was in West Virginia teaching, we missed 23 days of school in the spring semester due to snow. And so they're like, okay, everyone's got Chromebooks now. We're going to go virtual school days, right? So what happened was, well, some people don't have Wi-Fi connection. They got the Chromebook, but the Chromebook doesn't connect online, so what's it worth? Well, what we had to do was make sure that those whatever lessons that we gave them, we could also print out and have a paper option. So if we knew the blizzard was coming, school had a possibility of canceled, they had backpacks ready to go with those students, that they would bring those lit, and they had like a week time period to complete it afterwards. That's how we got around that with the technology issue. It's not ideal, but you'll see some people starting to put out curriculum out there. Team Builder is one that also puts it out there to kind of overcome that.
Excellent. I'm going to combine the next two, and this may be in your future slides. Examples of best practices for secondary students in a synchronous environment, and then how do you get feedback during live instruction?
Okay. So if we're doing synchronous, and I'm guessing I'm talking almost like PE with Joe style, but you're live on your Zoom session. You got all your students there. Yeah, you would have to have the two windows up in front of you, kind of like I have now. There's one of me where I can see over here, but then I got all my windows of my students. And you can mess with options in Zoom where, you know, how many of the Brady Bunch squares do you want to see at once, right? And you would have to be able to give those shout outs and call outs if I'm synchronous. I wouldn't recommend synchronous at the secondary level, really. I think asynchronous is going to be the best format if that's what your district's, you know, rolling towards for them. They're going to want that flexibility. You give them the student choice. What one student, if you're doing a cardio unit, one student can complete it, you know, doing map my run and going for a jog at his own pace based on his own ability level and his goals that he set. While another student, you know, his ability level, he might just be at a brisk walk and he's just playing Pokemon Go. I don't care as long as he gets his, you know, his movement, his activity level there. You know, he got to choose how he got to do it, which motivates him to actually complete it and give it to you.
We have one more question. Give students as much activity as possible, especially after remaining home. What would you suggest other than exercises, core exercises, to keep students engaged?
That choice. Let them choose what they're going to be participating in. And I think it really lends itself also to your setting, right? So I just gave that example of like Pokemon Go. Well, if I'm in a metro area, that totally takes away social distancing. Like it's just not going to work there. Now, if you're in Emporia, Kansas, that would work for a student because I can, population 30,000 town, you know, I can avoid people on the sidewalks for, you know, a mile around here. So giving them the choice, I think, also lets them adapt it to what's their comfortability level of what kind of risk they want to take on, you know. I know that's a concern of us teachers, right? We don't have that ability to adjust how much risk we take on.
Thank you for putting the questions in chat. I think we're ready to move on to the next slide.
Okay.
We'll go through the same process. Questions for that.
Dr. Good, I've got a question here in regards to our teacher education. How do you see this fall coming up with the COVID still happening, and there are young teachers in the field? How do you see that working out with our kids to complete their semester or year in our physical education profession for the teaching aspect of it, our future teachers?
That's a fantastic question. I've been asked this before. One of my first things that research questions I had and papers I like really delved into was how do we train people to teach online PE? Because when I came out of the program, no one had even told me it existed. And I was like, wait a second, like we need to have something in the curriculum where like, we let them know it exists. So I know here at Emporia State for the last 3 years, like I've been giving my undergraduates like, hey, this exists. Now I'm teaching secondary methods now, and I can't get into the school district, right? So what I'm using is our PE 100 active living courses, which is ipso facto grade 13 physical education. It's a fitness for life model. And I'm going to use those to have them construct modules, revamp the curriculum, all vet them, and then they're going to teach through an online platform asynchronously. If I have the opportunity to get them out hybrid out the schools, they're still deciding on it. I'm going to be doing things that can be distance, like we're going to do archery outside. And that's how I'm gonna get their experience in there, you know, things that can be spaced out and safe, and the equipment's easier to clean because, you know, I'm only one pot at a time. So that's my plan for it. I believe it's a higher level teaching skill. because these students, like you said, they don't even know how to teach face-to-face yet. Throwing them online, it'd be just throwing them in a wood chipper.
Yeah.
Everything I taught online, I taught face-to-face first, then I transitioned it online. And my suggestion to every teacher would be, do not reinvent the wheel. Think about, okay, when I'm talking about these concepts, do you have any lessons that fit these concepts? Because those are going to be the easiest to transition online. So you've got to know your content great first before you start messing with online pedagogy, right? You don't want to try to put the 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle together. You already got 750 pieces together, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead and just, keep that puzzle intact, then figure out the online. So transition what you got already to online that fits these concepts.
Yeah, because we got to move that shift from, first of all, getting them in front of the kids
Yes.
and training them either being in a visual, technology-wise, as well as they might have 3 or 4 kids in the college session with our other students, peer teaching in distance, but also get them understanding that they're going to be in a class sometime in the future when COVID's over. They're going to have a classroom full of kids when they're out there in their job position.
And it's funny you say that, because people have asked me, well, why don't you just teach them straight up teaching methods of online physical education? I teach a graduate course called Teaching Methods of Online Health and Physical Education, but it's to master's level students. The reason I'm not doing that at my undergraduate level is because if we go back to normal, because the vaccine comes out next year, and I just trained all these people to teach online, now they're face-to-face student teaching, I did them a disservice.
Correct. That's what I'm looking at. Is you got to get them a little bit of both, get them ready for both.
And hopefully that works out for them, but I'm at the mercy of, what my district here lets us go out and do, what they deem as safe.
All right. So I got some good stuff. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We can move on to that next topic. Tyler, that's great. Yeah.
All right. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about, so how do we fill that gap of social connectedness that we know through the research is lacking? I'm telling you right now, I know through experience was lacking when I first started teaching online PE. I know they really felt like they were on islands. They really didn't interact much when I started doing this about 2011. But these are some concepts I want to consider first. And these are kind of beyond the basics of, hey, define clear expectations for participation with, student to student. What's the length of the content you have to get? What are the prompts you have to get? The timeliness of responses to one another. So beyond those basics, what can we do? Now, again, you want this to be, you don't want this to be a teacher-centered thing where you're the one delegating all of it, like the prompts and what they have to talk about. It's really not feasible or educationally desirable for you to have the time management perspective to have it like where you can respond to every single comment and kind of go that. However, the goal of it is for you really to be like kind of shape the direction of the discourse. And you can do that through these small groups of organization, these student roles that we can assign, and then what are those topics that encourage interaction? Because the goal of these 3 concepts I'm having you consider here is to move the discussion from the exploration of something that you're going to talk about to more about, okay, how do I integrate this into the life and make it meaningful from the content, from a student perspective, to then to resolution. So for example, like a discussion board question about like, what's the weather look like out there? You have to respond 2 times. They might just look up and be like, the sky's blue. If another student's like, you're correct, the sky is blue. Not too much discourse. So how do we move it beyond just exploring a topic into like them integrating it to something that actually means something to them? So the first thing I would suggest is definitely small groups and organization. We don't know a ton about online physical education best practices, but we do know things about online education best practices. And when we're thinking about social interactions, how to facilitate them, small groups. So putting them in small groups, and then how do you organize them? One way is self-selected interest or common goals. I call these kind of goal groups. I probably got ahead of myself in saying that the most popular curriculum in online physical education pre-COVID, and one I would suggest to you now because it lends itself to COVID distancing policies, is a fitness for life model or wellness for life model. And this really lends itself to kind of having these goals where you can start kind of grouping them together. And these small discussion board groups I'm kind of talking about is they're really interested in talking about, what they're interested in. That's why, Facebook becomes an echo chamber because you find your commonalities in the common groups. Well, you kind of harness that same thing where you want students to share where they know that they're not yelling down an empty hallway. You want them to know that, hey, I'm going to share something with another student who's trying to do the same thing as I'm doing. So one of these things I did was to put these in small groups. I put them in small groups in online PE, and then we did these Twitter challenges. And I had an application that's now been bought out, defunct, but it's Photocracy now instead of Fleetly. But they would, based on their goals, there'd be a leader each week, and they had to have different challenges that they would tweet out and then keep up with the others and responding to it and kind of like snowballing into one another. And I didn't run this too long. It was only 1 or 2 weeks, but what happened was it was a lot more organic, and they started sharing outside resources from Twitter that related to their goal after they kind of did their challenges. So they knew that, hey, if I'm sharing this workout with someone, well, hey, they're trying to get stronger, or hey, they're trying to gain muscle, or hey, they're trying to lose fat. So when I share this resource, I know my peer is also going to want to hear about it because they're trying to do the same thing. So it was really cool to see them actually organically. I didn't have to prod them on this after this thing started going and rolling. So that's one suggestion that I would say is definitely pairing these. Other way to kind of think about it is kind of parts of the puzzle I've done. And that's kind of thinking like the jigsaw method, like case studies. So like each person has like a little different role to play or different perspective that they're going to look through it at. So I've done things where like we look at a diet, but in the group I'm saying, okay, your role when you're looking at this in the group is I need one person who's going to look at it from a scientist perspective, the rational dietitian. You need to make sure like everything that you're citing or you're throwing at them is facts-based and you can like back it up with science. I have like the all-in consumer. I'm like, you can get your opinion and your stuff and your information sources from like Facebook.coms. I don't care where you get it from. You drink the Kool-Aid, you think this is awesome. And then I have the skeptical family member who contradicts it with similar sources from wherever they find. But they have defined roles. And when I give them defined roles, it really helps them kind of like fuel that fire and find the discourse, whether they agree with the role position I gave them or not. But those small groups really do help facilitate interaction. Another one where I talked about, well, I guess got a little ahead of myself though, it does help focus the discussion. It really does challenge or test their ideas. And that's probably the thing. And I'm gonna show you another quick example of this. And this is something I initially did face-to-face and I moved online about 3 years ago for these roles for these leaders. And I call these read and react groups. And what was happening was, you know, I would assign something in my face-to-face course where I'd say, hey, you need to watch this video we're going to talk about in class, or this article we're going to talk about in class, here's some prompts. And what I was finding was, you know, we'd come to the discussion part and I'd get blank stares during the headlights, or I would get very superficial, you know, conversation about it, you know, like they really liked it, this or that. We didn't really dive or see different views. So one thing I started doing with these read and react groups. So what happens here is like they each have an assigned role. Like everyone's going to be the leader once. So group one has Tyler, Lance, and Christian in it. For the first one, Tyler's the leader. So everyone in blue for my first one's the leader. And then this group is going to be in a small group discussing it. So I did this in my face-to-face course, but I transitioned this online because then I could just make them in their own individual discussion boards. But this way they were in small groups, you know, tables, or we were huddled in the gymnasium when we talked about stuff. But this way, the benefit to it, why I did face-to-face, is now I know I got 9 people that are leaders that have already submitted prompts to me. And so it gave me a feeling like where I knew where they were going to come from. So I could actually have some good discussion because I know maybe Tyler viewed the video differently than Jessica over here. So I could ask Tyler about the prompts that I gave him time in class to talk to his small group about. And then we'd actually have some discourse going on. And I had people that I could definitely call on, and I guaranteed them, I was like, you're going to get called on for the discussion, and I know you're prepared to talk about it. So it was a good way to kind of facilitate that, but transitioning online made it even better because instead of making up, you know, 4 or 5 discussion board prompts and having people superficially respond, what was happening was now Tyler was in charge of that, and he had to make up the prompts that he thought were relevant to his group or how he saw from his perspective. And they were much more apt to respond to his than they were, because of course, guess what? They're going to have to do it, you know, maybe in 2 weeks, kind of like you reap what you sow. And another thing that I integrated into this was, okay, so how do I make them interested in actually commenting or doing this? Well, a lot of the stuff that I found out worked well was making them comment or make prompts or discuss their own work worked out very well. So one thing that we did, and this is a physical education teacher education example, but you could apply this concept to anything, was they did a consumer report over physical activity trackers. And so Tyler was in charge of looking over his group's reports over 2 different physical activity trackers and then making up discussion prompts to talk about those to his group. The benefit is, when he made up the discussion prompts, is Lance wants to talk about Lance's report and Christian's report, right? So it really was more of an organic conversation than just really, you know, not diving deep, because people, it really was a good anticipatory step because they already had the information available. They created it, so they wanted to talk about it. And I did that for each of those. So anytime that you can kind of involve that strategy, that helps a lot. Now, this is the part where how I organize it. So definitely making sure you kind of have those expectations out ahead of the game. So what does the leader do? So I made like one quick little video about, okay, hey, here's your role, here's what's expected, and here's some resources you can dip in. This is what I talk about when I'm talking about independent learning. So I'm kind of like a little feeder of information that they can get, and then I'm looking for them to be more independent and take it beyond that. And this is definitely a secondary type level strategy here, but this really does foster that independent learning that we're looking for there. So what are these topics that encourage social interaction? Well, they're related to the content, but they're personally relevant. So for example, I'll stay on that fitness tracker one, is, so we talked about like what's the validity of using physical activity trackers in our PE lessons, but it's personally relevant because they got to choose which device they thought would work in a gymnasium setting. And then they learned from their peers in discussion like, well, hey, maybe you don't need all those bells and whistles. You know, the $35 Gopher pedometer works pretty well and it syncs in 2 seconds. And so it was actually some good discourse. Hey, I didn't look at it that way. You know, I just wanted the Fitbit, and it's more of an individual device. So those are some things that I think about to kind of stoke that conversation file. Current issues that are happening today, which I'll give you an example of, and then over project or contents the students created is, I think, very clutch in having them have some good connected conversation, and it increases the level of product that you're going to get when they post it online, because if they know it's going to be in the limelight and they know that other people in their groups are going to comment and discuss it, it's a very big motivator in putting out a quality piece of work there. One thing, so current relevant issues, we did a COVID-19 podcast YouTube review. This worked out really well, so now I'm dipping into that wellness. Full disclosure though, this was an assignment I made up for a health course. So this is a freshman level, so you could probably run this, you know, probably freshmen through seniors health course, where we talked about, okay, a podcast review on YouTube. So I gave them a list of resources that they had to do. So I grouped them by which podcast did they review. So each time they click on the podcast, they'd listen to it, they'd write up their quick review and then post it to the discussion board affiliated with whatever podcast they listened to. And this really kind of helped start this anticipatory set of like what they were going to discuss about their podcast. And I can get this template and stuff available to you, but this was a good strategy to use of, you know, current events that were relevant to them. And you can kind of see from the prompts, you know, it's just like, okay, so, you know, what's your reaction? What questions do you have? Kind of just to get the thing started. And it's current. They all want to talk about how they shared it. Another one that I've used, and this one's a little different. And at first I didn't buy into this as much, but one of the people on my dissertation committee, her research area was into virtual reality, specifically into avatars. So how do avatars encourage people to be motivated and engaged in an online course? And they have a surprising effect in increasing student engagement online. Now, I used to run this in my face-to-face course, and I called it cartoon health characters, and I would have the students draw out the character, and we would use them throughout the term to talk about different health and PE topics, mostly related to like weight management, nutrition, and I'd put their health character in a new bind that they had to investigate their way out of. Now I've just updated it for the 21st century, which is a Bitmoji. So I'm like going to go ahead and just say, okay, now you're going to create your Bitmoji imaginary character. Now the cool thing about this is it gives them ownership over it. How do we actually create them? Well, the first thing that we do is just give them a brief little description about the character, about what they're going to do. And so we have them create this, and how they create this biography, it needs to be a fictional character that they create their Bitmoji, person off of. But how they create that is using this evaluation packet that they rate their character on different traits beforehand. And so this is the foundation of how they come up with that biography right there. Now, the funny thing about this is what happens, I found out, and is some trickle truth comes through. So that student who normally wouldn't talk about some issues they had related to themselves. So let's say they had an issue where they were getting peer pressured or bullied. They might not share that on a discussion board, but they will through their health character. And they won't know it, but they're more apt to talk about it. And people are more apt to share or sympathize or offer suggestions when they know, I'm sharing it with this Bitmoji character, not, Danny. And Danny is more apt to share like his actual issues. And I've even had, like people come up, and I've just noticed there's more discourse and more value to that discussion board when it's through this kind of avatar. I call it kind of trickle truths coming through. And so here's an example of like kind of how I would sprinkle it throughout the semester. I think I pulled the Bitmoji character out 4 or 5 times during COVID. And I was really surprised at how good the response was. They got really into it. It was almost like a D&D choose your own adventure. They were creating this story around the character. So, you can see, all right, so we're going to talk about a psychological plan because, you're having a lot of stress in your life. Here's what you have to deal with and overcome with your Bitmoji character. Post this to the discussion board. And now in the small groups, you have to come up with a psychological plan for one of your partners' Bitmoji characters. And so they're more apt to share the information with their partner about like what they're struggling with. And then the partner was way more willing to help out because they were helping out the Bitmoji, which they might have been helping out the real person. So those are some quick strategies there for social interaction. I'll pop back out here for a little Q&A. I guess Brian or Ron, I'll let you guys moderate that chat.
Thanks, Tyler. Can you share some ideas about what works well for grading and assessment in an asynchronous environment?
So I think I just popped my chat up and I saw someone say, okay, I was waiting to get to that about, so large group feedbacks. Yeah, physical education teachers, oftentimes you have that huge group of students. So like, let's say the Bitmoji characters, it's gonna be very, very difficult. It's going to be impossible. You're not going for a work-life balance. You're not going to be able to grade individual feedback for those people. What I would suggest to do is, as you're kind of like looking through those, what I would do when I had larger class, I think the biggest online P class I had was 90. I gave general feedback overview. So I still wanted to do those assignments, right? But what I did was I would give a 3-minute video like, hey, you guys, we just got through the stress thing. Here's some general feedback. I give some shout outs to 2 or 3 students per those like little general videos for feedback. Here's some general feedback to the whole entire group. Because beyond that, you're just not going to be able to survive given that much feedback.
Brian, had the same question, I think, regarding feedback. Does that answer your question?
Actually, Brian, can I jump in? Hi, Tyler. Just wondering more, for the day-to-day grading structure, as we're all coming back to this new environment, mostly hybrid. A lot of programs obviously have their grading systems already set up, but it's going to have to shift. And I think there's great opportunity here to kind of shift it more towards learning and skill acquisition and different things. What tips would you have for just general, as physical education teachers at a secondary level? How would you be assessing and grading students throughout a semester?
Yeah, one of the big components that we had to the online course, because the big thing is the validation of physical activity. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I know that's a big question, is how did we like grade that? And one thing that we had was goals, like move goals for the week. And that's what we called it, was move goals. So they would have a week to get an X amount of moves or steps per week. Now we use these moves because it was called a move band, but their software converted, if you had an Apple Watch, you had a Garmin, you had a Fitbit, any fitness tracker with the software converted it to moves. Well, the moves, we were basing off the CD standard of trying to get to 10,000 steps a day. So we started them off slow. We're like, hey, for 7 days, you need to have 56,000 moves. So less than the CDC recommendation, right? Like, you started them off slow, kind of getting acclimated to that. And they would get their physical activity points for the week by hitting those goals. They got half of it, they hit like half points. If they got below this, it was actually a negative indicator, like they went backwards. We found out that was a huge motivator as well. But they could track that throughout the process. And that was a larger portion in our online P course of the grade. Because one thing in online PE is we're really good at doing the cognitive component. Those learning games are very similar, if not identical in online and face-to-face. It's the physical activity gains where there is a very big difference. And the studies there's been 5 studies comparing traditional to online PE. The cognitive is all similar throughout. The physical activity gains are all different. Most notably, lower body strength whenever they measure it. People were skipping leg day, right? But that's what the studies are saying, like legitimately, that's what's happening. Only one study saw similar fitness gains throughout, and that was a 2001 study.
That's awesome. I don't know why skipping leg day happens as an adult.
Yeah.
Do you have examples of elementary, largely K-5?
Yes, I do, and I can pop into a slide. And this was actually one that I kind of collaborated with Dr. Gossett on earlier from our last session. So I'll give you kind of like a prelim before I share my screen real quick and flip ahead to my slides. I included this just in case someone asked. So I mentioned before that it's not a best practice, so we stopped talking about it. But what happened last semester in my teaching methods of online physical education course, I had a teacher from the Bronx that was in that course, and she said her administrator said that she had to assess during this last COVID thing. And I'm like, okay, we'll figure out a way that would be best for elementary online PE assessment. So I'll kind of show you what we came up with for that. And this is kind of like our best idea in a worst case kind of situation where she had to get that type of assessment. But again, you have to rely on the caregiver. So let me share my screen and I'll pop up to that slide to give you kind of an example of what we kind of came up with. And I also consulted with Dr. Gossett on this. He's the content expert in elementary online or elementary physical education curriculum. And I kind of added my online component to that. Here we are. Let's go right here. Slideshow, through slide. All right. So this is kind of what we put into kind of like a Google form. And the thought process behind this was the caregiver is going to be really the driver person behind the instruction. So the example for this one was like, okay, so the elementary grade level outcomes are very motor skill based. And so my suggestion would be, okay, you want to embed that motor skill that you're trying to relay to the student within some activity that involves their family and gets their family involved in it and their family wants to be involved in it. So like some type of game in which they have to complete the motor skill in order to participate in the game effectively. Now, this is where it kind of turns into homeschool physical education, where you're going to have to also kind of rely on the parent to disseminate, okay, is that skill being learned correctly or not? So what it shows first is a short, and full disclosure, I did not make these videos, but they were online, and I think they're great examples of if I were to make these videos for elementary online PE, what I would include in them. Someone who looks like the students you're teaching, right? That's what I have included, the quick critical elements for them, because what's going to happen is the parent's probably going to watch this with their student. The student's getting the visual example. The parent's getting the what am I looking for example. And these are short 1.5 minute videos. Okay, hey, what's the activity? Again, it looks like the environment and the people that they'd be participating with. The caregiver and in a home environment with, maybe their brother, sister, or someone else. And so then they have to complete this challenge or activity with the skill embedded in it to happen. And then the parent gets this little, this little GIF where it shows the 3 different or 4 different levels and what it looks like. And the GIF works really well here because it just repeats and repeats it over and over. And this is a software called Vault that is used to create these 4-panel GIFs. But you can see this one's emerging, acquire. Actually, let's go ahead and zoom in on that for you. See emerging, acquired, developed, and accomplished. So it shows 4 different levels here. And so for the caregiver, so you get an idea of, okay, what type of assessment you could do here, they just click on one of the 4 things that they see from the GIF. So it's a simple 3-step process because you don't want to make it too cumbersome for them to do it. But that was the kind of idea or thought and I would keep this, if I did something like this and I had to assess or kind of teach this skill through it, I would keep the format the same throughout, right? I'd have the skill related video, it's embedded in the activity, they get used to the GIFs and they hit 1 of 4. This at least gets you an idea when we went back to normal of what you're dealing with, what you're going to have the student product coming back to you or where you're starting from, right? when you actually get them back face to face in an ideal environment.
Tyler, what's that website again for the GIF? For the GIF?
What created that 4-panel GIF is called Vault. It's just, that's the software they used. Am I out of screen share? Yeah, I am. Okay. Yes, and Kiddo is the website. Yeah.
Kiddo is the website. Okay.
Yeah, it's a good website. That was one I thought was the best for just showing and relaying the skill really quickly.
Any tips on keeping students engaged during a live lesson?
The best thing I could say is keeping your eye on that monitor. Shout outs to students. Beyond that, I would take suggestions from the room. I can't say I have a lot of experience in synchronous online physical education, just because we weren't doing it.
Other questions for Tyler?
I want to move to our last topic.
Okay. This one I'll try to be a little briefer on here. All right. Oopsie daisy.
Any have asked for the PowerPoint. We are recording this for these, so you may go back and look at some of this information. It'll be posted on the AHPERD and COA website.
There we go. So we're going to talk a little bit about the engaging student in physical activity online here. And this is a quote I got from an old mentor of mine. And I think it hits the nail on the head. You know, that the tool, whatever tool you're going to use in your district, you know, it's only going to be effective if it's used appropriate. You know, so a hammer, it's good, but it's not so good for doing fine work. You got to think about what you want to use appropriately. So whatever tech and that technology tool belt that you already have kind of accessible to you. So my first thing I would tell you is, you know, check out with your IT director about what software do we already subscribe to, because you might find that there's something that you can leverage the features and functions to work in physical education for your district. So for example, I know a lot of people like to use Coach My Video or Coach's Eye as a video analysis app for students to videotape themselves and then analyze the critical elements of a movement pattern. Well, let's say, for example, your district already subscribes to Huddle. Huddle for their sport teams. Huddle has an application called Huddle Technique that is already paid for by your district, and that you can leverage the same thing that Coach My Video uses and Coach's Eye use, but you already pay for it with Huddle Technique. It's a video analysis app, has the same features and functions, so why pay for two things? And that kind of gets me to the point of like rowing the boat the same way. So really diving into like, okay, what tech do we already have, so we can like reach out to those people in your district, because if you have it, chances are someone applied for it and they know how to use it. It might not be in a PE context, but you're the content expert there, and then you can apply those features and functions to enhance student learning with that tech there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about things that I did with my online physical education course, and somewhere I saw it trending, and I see it trending this way with tech and PE in general. I've always seen kind of mobile learning and online PE kind of like love and marriage, like can't have one without the other. And the reason I say that is for these reasons are kind of thrown up on the screen about all the things that's potential for it to measure, remembering online PE being very fitness and wellness based out there in the world, and the most that you're going to see. But the device they're probably going to be after they get outside of high school, so they've graduated, they don't have the PE teacher, you know, giving them the workouts or how to move anymore. They're probably going to use their phone more than likely, unless you're old school like me, you still carry around a notebook with your workout in it. That's probably how they're going to get their information, and then how they're going to record it and like follow along about trying to live this healthy lifestyle. But the reason I chose it, beyond measuring these things that I wanted to measure in a fitness and wellness or fitness for life curriculum using it online, was it also was cool because it accurately measured movement, or just how many steps that we're getting. Now there's a caveat to this research study from Wu and Wu, which is a seminal study that was looking at, okay, can we use mobile devices to track activity levels? Well, yes, it does 90%, and that's like the buzzword catch title, but it's only 90% accurate if students wear that phone or mobile device on their arm. That's where it's 90% accurate. Now these phones in them now have gyroscopes, GPS, accelerometers in them, so yes, but it has to be worn properly there. Similar to like a pedometer has to be worn properly to measure correctly. Now if it's worn on the hip, like the dad holster, you're dropping down into the 80 percentile. If you put it in your pocket, it was just in the 50 percentile. So that was the thing. So one thing I knew from that research was like, when we did my online PE course, remember, these were students signing up for it. We had like $2 generic bands they could put their phone into, and they had to wear it on their arm to get it tracked. And the incentivized it was because we had those move goals. Like, yeah, you're going to be moving this much. You want to make sure that thing gets tracked effectively. So when I'm looking for some application or software to use in online physical education, here's kind of the big three. And this isn't from research, this is just my own experience teaching online that I looked for in that. And the first thing is I look for things that are free, hopefully that I can find that are free. And we'll talk about sometimes how free isn't free here in a bit. Two, that's very important, is it has a dedicated course website. And what I mean by having a dedicated course website is not only does it have that application on a mobile device, but it also has a computer-based website. That way, if a student doesn't have access to a mobile device, which most do in today's age, the last Pew Institution study said 81% of Americans have a smartphone now. Now, how much accessibility your students have in your area, that's going to be different for different contexts. But by having the dedicated course site, it makes it accessible to a lot wider audience. And it also makes it easier for you to assess when you do that online, because you don't want to grade from a phone or a tablet. You want to grade from a PC, and that dedicated course website allows you to do that. Now, most importantly, if it doesn't have this, 9 times out of 10, I'm not going to use it in online ed. And that's the ability to create and share. And the reason for that is when it has that ability to create and share, that develops that ownership and lets them individualize the content to themselves. So that's what I would say there. And last point I forgot to make about the dedicated course website is it helps eliminate what I call the digital dog ate my homework. And that's where, you know, hey, my phone was dead, or this happened so I wasn't able to access it. It's just one more outlet where there's a plan B, right? Because in teaching, you always need that plan B. So I selected some applications that I was going to use in my online PE class, not only to keep up physical activity, but also to kind of relay what type of physical activity we were participating in. So after I ran my class, and so I designed a class for online PE that could be completely ran through a mobile device. So from beginning to end, they never had to actually sit down at a computer unless they wanted to, or they had to troubleshoot something. But after I ran this class for a year, I was curious. I was like, okay, so what are the features and functions in these applications that make them desirable to use in an online PE setting? So I was looking at things that the students would find desirable and makes them want to use these fitness or nutrition-based applications that I was using. So what's their behavioral intention to want to use these in an educational setting? And so these are the things that you're kind of looking at. And this is a theory of acceptance and technology model. And so it's looking at things like, okay, how well do I think it's going to perform? The performance expectancy. How much effort is it going to take me to make this thing work? Is there IT support, facilitating conditions? Is my instructor giving me, you know, the how-to videos about how to use this? And then self-efficacy, like I can solve my own problems. The biggest two things that came out of this was performance expectancy. So this is going to help me out with learning the content, and self-efficacy. I can troubleshoot this on my own, which translates to I want to use my own device and I want to choose my own software at some point. So those were the two things that we found. And you probably find that if you wanted to do any fitness tracking, they're not going to want to buy a proprietary device. If they already have an Apple Watch, they want to use their Apple Watch. If they already have a Fitbit, that's what they want to use. Same thing with phones. If they have a Samsung, they're not an Apple person. That's what they want to use. And that's what I would suggest you use, letting them use their own devices. And we'll talk about a piece of software that is device agnostic that talks to all those. And so all three of these apps are device agnostic. They work with a Windows phone, which barely exists, Apple, or Android phones. So those are things to definitely kind of consider because of that self-efficacy piece and online PE, that they want to use their own stuff there. Now, okay, so this is great. I've picked out a piece of software for the district that they already subscribed to. Now I want my students to use it. How am I going to get this information to them besides just saying, hey, use this software? Because you don't want to fall into the trap of that myth of digital native. Well, screen recording. You used to have to jailbreak your phone to do this, but luckily in 2017, iPhone finally gave you the ability to do this. And where you're going to find this here, and I can leave a how-to video on this, but in your control center, under customization, you can find to add the screen recording option. It's right here. So if you flick up on a iPhone 7 or below, it's an up swipe or a diagonal slide on a newer one. But that's where you're going to find this record your screen feature. And that's really good to use because in online education, it needs to be very monkey see, monkey do. I mean, just like in physical education, you give your visual demonstration, you know, it's going to be, you want it to look like exactly like the activity they're going to participate in. Similar to things like application instructions, if you're going to use a piece of software, it better look like their screen so they can follow along with you. One caveat to this on the iPhone, and Samsungs can do this too, is you want to check is when you press this button, it will not automatically record your audio. The crucial thing to this is to have your voice overview of this. So as you're flicking through the application, telling them, hey, here's what we're going to use and how you need to access the app to, you know, get interactive with our content this week, is you need to have that voiceover. So make sure that you hold and press down on this to pull up this option and make sure this is orange. If this is orange, it turns your microphone on and then it allows you to give a voiceover while you record your screen. And so this is super useful to knocking out a ton of questions early and having a resource for students to know the application. Now, the benefit you might be thinking is like, oh man, it's a lot of hassle to make these things. It's a way easier than written instructions, I can tell you that. And if we're thinking towards the future about your course is when we do go back face-to-face, then they have a resource. If you want to flip your classroom and use this in a face-to-face setting, they would learn how to use this software before they came into class. And then you just hit the ground running and you're not teaching them how to use any of the software. So I'd always recommend screencasting, especially for a flipped classroom approach. And when you create these assignments, think about that is how am I going to use this in face-to-face when we go back to normal? Because that's how you should be reconstructing things. So this is Spectocracy, one that I used for it. And the reason I use this is mainly because I had a dedicated course website and I had the ability to create and share workouts. So the first time around, I showed them how to use it and I gave them a basic workout. And then they could all friend me on my professional Spectocracy account. And then I would have that workout for them to click on, put on their own phone and go through. Then after that, I kind of let the reins out a little bit because they got used to using and flipping through the basics of it through just going through mine. And then they, based on their own goals, they got to create their own stuff using this software. The cool part about it is it had some features and functions that were great for online PE because it also had these videos that they could watch because now that we're online, I'm not always there to show them exactly what exercise they want to do related to their goals. So that was something that was very, very beneficial. And then I was able to kind of communicate through this and also have them share with each other their own workouts. And the cool part for validating physical activity, which you're probably thinking of, is it would timestamp the workouts. So if they completed the first set of squat, it would say at 8:46, set 1, at 8:49, set 2. And it would have a timestamp on that to say total time worked out. Now, that's just one level of, accountability. It's not the end all be all because they could sit there, and tap it at a time. But the hurdle is a lot greater than just sending you a screenshot of that. The other thing was the dedicated course website. So that's what the course website would look like so that I could see when they completed it and what they completed and they share with me. You might be thinking, okay, so how do you consolidate all this? I got 200-300 students for them to turn this stuff in. The best thing I would tell you to do is either create a Google form. That would be just a regular procedure that you do where they would screenshot this stuff in, put it in the Google form so it's in your learning management system if you're using Google Classroom, and submit it that way. That way it's actually manageable. You can see who submitted what, and I would just have a standard form where they plug that information in that looks the same throughout, like physical activity requirement week 1, 2, 3, 4, and that form just looks similar. So it could be like your step count for the week, screenshot with that, attach your activity for the week, screenshot with that, and they just submit the one form in. Because you don't want to make the mistake I made the first time by having them email you pages of Word document screenshots. It doesn't work out well. So the Google form would help you organize that in a manner where you can kind of go down and actually see who turned in what quickly. Now, one thing that's been that people weren't as worried about until we hit this COVID with online PE is, okay, so if you're using these services that are free, they're not always free, correct? They could be using your information for something. That's how these apps make money. They make it off ad revenue. So what are some things, some services, and your district is, I'm sure, aware of this, that you can use to make sure all that data and that student information that is sensitive is in a secure place. Well, there are some paid for subscription services that do things very similar to the platform I just showed you. But I just want to share a couple of these with you. And the first one I've mentioned before is the Move Band. So the Move Band was the one that I used to track steps and moves. And so someone always asks me, okay, so what in the world is, a move? Well, it's about, let's see, there's 10,000 steps. So it's like 9,500 moves is like something like 12,000 steps. But we just translated an equation, so we like getting up to that CDC. And so this is a picture of a class that I ran back in 2015 with the Move Band software. The cool thing about that was they could use their own activity tracker to sync with this piece of software here to track their thing, to track their move goals for the week. So each week I would just set a goal for the class, like you have to hit this moves, and they would just sync via Bluetooth to their phone to the software or their PC. They could just Bluetooth sync it up, plug it in, whatever the fitness tracker was, and then it would sync all this stuff up to them. So that was one way to validate physical activity. Now, this probably won't be ideal in your situation with the COVID that we're going through right now. This was people who chose the online physical education route. But I do want to share it with you because it could possibly be an option down the road and how I validated physical activity. And so this is one way to do it in a way that they were very receptive to, because they got to use their own device and they could see their progress throughout. And that was like over like the whole term. So it was really interesting. Some of these people even kept up with it afterwards, which is really cool to see. I mean, they were still syncing 5 years later. So that's pretty cool. Another one here is rack performance. Now, very similar to just like the photocracy I showed you, it gives you the ability to create workouts and then push them out to a classroom for them to follow. They've also, like many of these companies, there's many out there, I'm gonna show you a couple more, of these strength and conditioning tracking software that they've started to leverage their mobile application for distance education. And so you create the workouts in here, they track the progress, and similar to photocracy, it does a timestamp for total time of workout to validate the PA. I have seen people get creative with these where they even have their students like tweak their progress out. But again, I would probably have them put this in a Google form for you and submit it to your Google Classroom with their screenshots so you could actually manage all of that. The cool thing about these software is it does manage it where it puts it into classes where the teacher can have, class 1, 2, 3, 4, and just look at all their students in one block. So the crux of the technology is it allows the teacher to manage all that data that's coming in. And it does have a validation piece that's pretty cool and works. So, you might want to check with your athletic department because they might already be subscribing to a service like this. Other ones out there, this is a screenshot of Team Builder. You're going to see very similar in nature. And all these have very, very similar functions. Another cool thing that both these Team Builder and Rack Performance have is it has the ability for you to record your own video and attach it to whatever the lift name is, which is really cool because to keep that personalization up in your classroom, the students want to see their teacher, which is awesome. And also, people, you probably noticed, call a lift 3 different things. So it lets you personalize that as well with whatever the terminology is for your district and how you're going to call something. And it puts a teacher's face, and you're demonstrating, so you know it's the correct way that you want it done. And so then they click on this, they can watch the video that you've uploaded to this software, and it has the timestamp to keep up on this. And since it's a paid subscription service, it's all on that server. It's not shared with outsiders for ad revenue, that can be compromised. Now these services you're talking, they're going to cost from about $850, Rack Performance, that's the low end. It's about $1,500. If you think about this on a wider scale from district level, depending on how many students go through your physical education program, it's not too bad of a trade-off if you start thinking about price per head. If you have about 800 students and you're paying Rack Performance $850, you're less than a cup of coffee for something that can be used for every student for the whole term. Now, I'm not advocating for any of these pieces, but I did want to share them because I know people are very sensitive to that data, and this is one option for that. And your district might already have it for the strength and conditioning coach. The last one is a Platform. Platform has also started to release COVID and distance education curriculum even for PE teachers through their software, but it works exactly with all the features and functions that I just went through there as well. So that's kind of for the validating physical activity. I want to cut it short there just because I want to get Q&A. I figure this would be where the most questions kind of come from. So I'll go ahead and kick out real quick.
Thanks, Tyler. Dewey recommends train heroic as well. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. And then anything for us to watch for face-to-face 12 feet apart elementary teaching and possibly hybrid K-5.
I'm sorry, could you elaborate, like in regards to?
Kim, can you hear me, Kim?
Yes. We're going back face to face. We have to stay 12 feet apart with the students, and it could go possible hybrid depending on what happens. I didn't know if you had a site that you recommend for ideas on that, different lessons or.
Yeah, that's going to be tough. I can't say I've heard, because we're 6 feet apart here for ours, and it's just going to be so different. So we've been, I have my stick in the gymnasium that we measured out, and then the gymnasium got taken after that for a classroom.
Yeah, we don't have gyms either.
Yeah, they're gone now. So I wish I had a good suggestion for like what videos and stuff you could play. But I figure you could use, if you were still using like the P90X stuff, I mean, you could probably still do that body weight stuff if you were spaced out enough, for them to see, which allows you, which I do like because it allows you to kind of be a guide on the side. So Sworkit was an application I used a lot early on. Sworkit was one I used early on, which works well for that setting that you're telling me about. It doesn't have much validation of PA, of physical activity, but what it does is you can construct a quick body weight workout on it that's timed, like interval, and you can project it up on the screen for them. And then it allows you to kind of work the perimeter and see they're doing the movement correctly, but it keeps them spaced. It's called Sworkit. I guess here I'll show it to you real quick. I did create an extra slide here.
While you're doing that, Tyler, lots of talk of Law 2D, and I think all of us who work in public schools know that we need to run all these through our tech department, make sure they're Law 2D compliant.
Oh, I'm sorry, say it one more time.
Lots of talk about Law 2D, so we want to make sure that all these are Law 2D compliant.
Yeah, and that's why I say you got to go and see, like, you're rowing the boat the same way, because some of you will already be subscribed to these things and the red tape's already been gone through. It's just like, can you use those features and functions for distance ed? And it's funny that a lot of these companies like Rack Performance, Team Builder, Platform, they were purely looking at strength and conditioning coaches. They had mobile apps and stuff. They weren't even looking at distance education or online PE, but you can definitely use them for online PE because you can even put your own protocols on them. For Rack Performance, for example, we were using that for the strength and conditioning for athletes here in Boise State, but you can also input your own fitness protocols in there. So we could even put in the FitnessGram protocol in there for our testing and then use it to record FitnessGram results. And it collected all the data for us. So it's multifunctional.
One suggestion, I see Brian laying on, Tyler, that his ed teachers, Brian, they want to
Target. And if they don't have them there, you should be able to order them online, and you can ship them to come in a 3-pack.
She's about your
So a council of administrators, why not a council of physical education teachers? And you could do it zone by zone. So the phys ed teachers could get together, and it might be K3. What are you doing? What's your distance? What activities you're doing? How's it working out? Then you have a group of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, etc. And the phys ed teachers can Zoom and exchange ideas. And that'd be easy to work with each zone. You contact your zone president and say, we'd like to set up a Zoom meeting. We want it to be grade level specific.
So Ron, I like that you're applying the concepts of the social component already. Small groups related to their own content. They have a personal interest in. That's how you apply those concepts, right? No, you're right, totally. They'd be more apt to share. The information would be relevant to them and increase discussion.
It's similar to what we're doing now, but you do it with physical education teachers, and they're the heart and soul of our teaching. So why shouldn't they Zoom and share ideas? That's critical.
Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, share, and I'll be sharing through Brian and Ron, whoever wants to push it out. I'm not sure. I did send out those sheets with all the links last time, and what was that, last July or first week of July, second week of July. I'll push those back out to you too, and you guys can push them to everyone in this room for those quick links. But every piece of software I showed on there, I have links to tutorials like how-tos if you want to use it, assignment instructions, the whole 9 yards that you can take for those and use with your teachers in your districts, because it's context, you'll have to fit it to whatever you're working with.
This has been very helpful. We want to be sensitive to your time as well. We're an hour and 15 minutes here. Are there any final questions for Tyler before we move on?
Tyler, I'll let Brian finish up, but on behalf of Council of Administrators, thank you for your time. This has been interesting, intriguing, informative. I'm glad we get together, have over 100 participants with us. Tyler will be with us again when we do our virtual conference. That'll be September 30th, October 1, 2. So he'll join us again, and anything specific, if you want to get to me through Council of Administrators, we can gear up a program for that. Brian, I'll let you close if you would, please.
Yeah, that's great. Tyler, I want to just say thank you as well. It's been extremely helpful. And first of all, thanks for letting us record it, because we're going to share this with folks that couldn't be with us today.
Yeah.
And I know that people want to go back and look at some of those resources. If you could send us those resources, we'll make sure that people in our area get those. And I want to thank.
Just go ahead and post those links right now for you in the chat.
Okay, that'd be great.
I'll post. Let me dig them up real quick here.
While you're doing that, I want to thank everybody else for joining us. I think as we get closer to school, maybe a meeting in another week, because all of us are knee deep in it right now. And the finish line, we're not going to get to the finish line today or next week. And these are very helpful. So I'm going to suggest we meet again next Friday as we process some of this and we get a little closer to implementation. And if that's okay with everybody, you're welcome to join us. So I want to thank everybody, and thanks, Tyler. And I'll set up a Zoom for next Friday so we can continue the discussions and build off what we've been doing.
Fantastic. Brian, thank you for hosting and working with Tyler. Great stuff. Everybody have a fantastic day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's 2 links for you guys for the Google Doc for all the stuff we talked about. Oh, people are hopping in already. Good deal. One thing I will say we just started working on last night is we do professional development for districts, but I've brought someone in on it. We're going to start doing beginner level and like intermediate level online PE for district stuff that we're putting together. Hopefully to have together here. And for New York, Colleen called me up, and so we're going to put that together for New York State for here. For something else they're doing down the road of beginner level and intermediate level stuff. So that should be coming down the pipe soon.
Nice.
It's been very helpful.
I'll just go ahead and hang back for a little bit. I'll just go ahead and mute myself.
So Brian, too, you talked about next Friday, and then maybe when school gets going and we're in for about 2 weeks, it would be interesting and timely to have another Zoom meeting.
Yeah. I would agree. And then when we're all out in 4 weeks, we can have another Zoom meeting.
It's so scary. You just would love to come back, have things be idealistic, work, have kids in school, have the face-to-face as much as possible. But seems like there's not a lot of answers for what we're going to be up against. That's for sure.
Yep. So I think I'm going to end the meeting. Tyler, you good?
Yep, I should all be good here.
Okay, I'm going to end the meeting for everybody. I want to thank you again and wish you a good start next week.
Very good. Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Take care. All right.